Well, thank you for coming to my talk. It's the last one of the day, and I know there's the closing party, so very much appreciated that you came and made it. My name is Brenda. I'm the CEO and one of the co founders of Tellor, and my background is in economics. And we started Tellor. The very first iteration of it, we did in a hackathon in the summer of 2018 when things were a lot more gray. Um, the government wasn't so against crypto back then, and we actually very first iteration of it we created in DC, in a hackathon in DC. And back then, the main narrative was like there was gonna just somebody was gonna create this new chain that was gonna be the ETH killer, and it's gonna just take over the market, and it was gonna just be big, one big player. And obviously, that did not play out that way. But what it did do, it created a lot of competition. So in the process of people trying to do this, we ended up scaling in a very different way that we thought we would. We now have different ecosystems. You know, we have EVMs, we have Cosmos, we have Polkadot. So we sort of scale that way. And then with all of these systems popping up, then we also have a lot of protocols thinking, well, you know what? Why am I going to pay transaction costs to another chain? I'm just going to launch my own chain. And so now we are looking at a very different picture than in 2018. So as an oracle, and honestly, if you're running your own company, you have to stay flexible. You have to look at where the market is going and be able to evolve. So we looked at this and we said, okay, what do we need to do to be able to support this multi-chain world with the parameters that we live in for Tellor specifically? And we obviously want to be able to provide faster data than we currently do. This very decentralized, so we've always been a little bit slower than centralized oracles, where we currently work more as an optimistic oracle. So the longer that data is on chain and is not disputed, because disputes happen on chain, then the more likely or it is that the data is good. And so then our users can use it. So we usually tell them, wait about 15 minutes. If you want it any faster, run a monitor, and then you can use it a lot faster than that. And then obviously we want to be able to produce or to support those companies that have these long tail niche data, maybe new tokens that are not as liquid or that other oracles may not be able to support. Obviously, with some guardrails around them, we usually work a lot with these teams to come up with robust definitions for what they're trying to do and making sure that either they can come up with something that makes it really expensive to manipulate the asset or that they have proper fallbacks in case something does happen. And then obviously, I think as as research improves and continues to grow for CK proofs, I think a lot of the bridging is going to be solved by it, to be honest. A lot of these proofs are going to provide, part of the services that we as oracles provide. So we have that really in the back of our minds. And so it's not going to be just good enough to provide data. You're going to have to provide really good data. So you're going to have to become not just a data provider, but a data creator. And then at the top of our list, something that we are not willing to negotiate on is decentralization. So this is how we want to evolve. And with that in mind, we went ahead and developed our own app chain. What a surprise. Everybody does that nowadays. But so we're calling it Tellor Layer. Eventually it would just be Tellor. But within it, you have to, when you're creating your own chain, I did not realize in 2018 that I was going to be doing this in 2023, 2024. But now you're looking at different problems of security. There's the security of the chain, and then the security of the actual data that you're trying to provide your users. So what we came up with is we're going to have two different sets of not users of supporters, or two different sets of base level security players. So it's the validators, they support the consensus, and then the reporters. The validators, we need them to be, we want to be interoperable because we want to support all these chains. And so For you to be really fast, then you can't have thousands and thousands and thousands of validators, unfortunately. So that created a problem where we needed to put a cap on that. But to provide data and to be able to support those niche requests from people, we actually need the reporter set to be really, really big. That one we want it to be as big as as they can stake, or as much as they can stake. So as many reporters as possible. So that created sort of like a conflicting goal in a way. So that's what we came up with, these two different groups that both are going to be staked, and to maximize the efficiency of their capital, we're allowing dual delegation. So you can be a validator and a reporter. We split the rewards. 25% go to the validators, 75% go to the data reporters, because we want to make sure that we incentivize more people to provide data. And if you're a validator, you should probably want to be a reporter. We want to push you that way. So we're using incentives very purposefully to be able to drive people to do what we want them to do. Disputes happen on chain. So just like in the in normal Tellor, oh, I forgot to tell you how it works. So Tellor actually works by anybody can become a data reporter if you stake on chain. And anybody can come and dispute the validity of your data for starting at 10% of your stake. And if they're correct, they take the whole stake from the reporter. And so this creates, checks and balances based on incentives, and it happens all on chain. Yeah, and then it goes to a vote of the community that is divided equally among four groups of people: the users, the data reporters, the token holders, and the team. The users and the data reporters earn voting power by the users by tipping for data, and the data reporters by providing data on chain. And then if you hold a token, then you're whether you're a reporter or a user, then you are part of that other 25%. And then the team acts as a referee. So all the disputes continue to be on chain, on layer. And that is because that's basically our security system. It's how much you stake, how much, it's basically how, it's a function of how expensive it is to try and take over the chain, or try and grief the system for a while for a specific for data. So that is our security system. Obviously, the main goal of creating the new chain, though, was to support all of these new chains in a secure way, in a much faster way. So to accomplish that, we implemented the whole differences between the validators and reporters. But another thing that we ran into immediately is how we're going to bridge the data. And we decided to go with to use the Cosmos SDK, just because it's just more modular, and we thought it's been tested. Also, we didn't decide to do a roll-up because of the oh god, we just talked about this earlier, but it just seemed too centralized for us in terms of anyway, it seemed too centralized for us, so we decided to go with the Cosmos SDK. But immediately we run into the problem of how we're going to reach our data. So we reach consensus on our chain, and how can we actually serve it to all of these other chains. So we're using something really, really new in Cosmos SDK, which is a vote extension. So basically within, you don't touch the consensus mechanism, you just add another vote for an additional thing that you want to do. And in our case, that additional thing is just attesting to the data that is going to be relayed to other chains. And this is brand new. We are the guinea pigs. We try generally not to be that, but for our purposes, this works perfectly for how we want to use our SDK. And then that immediately goes into the security issue of how do you update your validator set, and how often, and what if, all the attack vectors that come with it. So the way that we approach that is we're going to make our bridge very, very slow. We have our token lives on Ethereum. We don't plan to deploy another token. And so, we're listed on centralized exchanges, so we're not planning on really doing anything with that. So that puts us into this sort of box where because our token lives on Ethereum, we have to bridge it to our chain so that we can make that work. And one of the ways that we plan on mitigating the risk of somebody just coming over and taking over the validator set and taking over the chain is by only allowing 5% a 5% change in the validator weight every 12 hours. And by doing that, you can also monitor the bridge to see how much of our token is being bridged over to our chain. And if there is an attack, or if we think that there's an attack coming, then we can actually start doing something about it. But it will take a really long time, at 5% every 12 hours, to actually take over 66% of the network. So that's something that that we implemented specifically for our purposes, and other chains have done that, where they just do it really slowly. So we feel confident that this will work. Also, the one thing that creating your own chain really affords you, it's the ultimate backstop of backstops, which is forking your own chain if something were to happen. So you have your social consensus behind that. You're just like, you know what, we just don't like it. So, or even if you took over the chain, just the threat that we can actually erase what you did should be enough to dissuade you from attacking the chain. But if it isn't, we can't do it, and we will do it. Or I think the community would go with it for sure. Another thing that we wanted to accomplish with this is provide what we describe as robust data, be able to provide robust data, some subjective data, more niche data. Robust data, we call that the data that is supported by 66%, by at least 66% of the validator weight, or validator slash reporter weight. And if everybody's submitting this data, the way that it works is like if you request the price of ETH, all about the reporters can provide the price of it. So you get 100 prices of ETH, and then the median becomes your ETH. But then you have all of the weight from all of those reporters backing that, supporting that that data feed. So your security is higher, and that's what we call robust, right? And although it is robust and supported by the network, we still caution people to take your time to use the value, because most of the time it's going to be fine. It's only the edge case, but the edge case is the one that matters. If the chain was to be taken over or something was to happen, you are going to liquidate things immediately on something that you shouldn't have. And when you're dealing across chains, it's just very difficult to create this dance that where there is that everything works as expected. So we always tell, and we will be telling our users eventually when we go live with this, is still wait. Make sure you have those fallbacks. Make sure that you always assume the oracle is going to fail, and that you are able to handle that on your side. But it is more robust data. It has more security behind it. Subjective data and those niche data, or like random information that people need, we want to be able to support that. That is what is going to propel, I think, the industry to really experiment and figure out where we fit in the world. And I think that is incredibly important for new companies to have this avenue. And so that type of data is very optimistic. It's like if only you support it, or two or three of us support it, then it's still going to be on chain. But what we do is, with every piece of data, whether it's robust or subjective or niche or whatever you want to call it, we provide a confidence level to the user of how much weight was behind that reported information. And that way they can determine within their side whether or not to use it, or how quickly to use it, whether they should wait a long time or not. And it also allows them to evaluate the cost of attack. So if you know that consistently you have 66% of the reporter weight behind it, it's very easy to calculate that. You multiply that by the price of our token, and then if that price, or if that number is a lot lower than the TVL that you're trying to support, then that might be not a good idea. But at least you know the risk and you can quantify it. Because, as I tell people, if you don't take the time to quantify the cost to attack your network, a hacker will. That's their entire job. That's how they make money. Like it's a business for them. So, so with that in mind, we want to be able to support all of this, but we also want to be able to provide the tools so that users can implement us in in a responsible way. And specialty data. So this is where I was going with the whole data creation for oracles. This is sort of it goes back to it's not just enough for us as oracles to be providing off-chain data on-chain, but we actually have to become data creators and better data creators than we can find on the traditional system, hopefully. So our first attempt at this is going to be to recreate the CPI on chain. And basically, if anybody doesn't know what the CPI is, it's just the average change over time in prices for a basket of goods that you use. And this basket of goods is generally the government chooses this, and then they provide us the data, and we just use it blindly and allow them to use it blindly to create legislation that directly affects us. I don't know how many of you have a wage clause, a wage increase clause, or in your contracts, but that is very common. Especially governments generally have an adjustment for their employees based on inflation, or retirees. Like pension, how much you get on your pension today versus a year from now is going to depend on this number. And the government can also print a bunch of money, and that creates inflation. And that's basically, in a way, they're just I mean, it's not a robbery, but it's kind of a theft, right? Because they're just taking money away from you if you can't afford the same things you used to be able to afford. And so what this has created is a big conflict of interest. And we don't talk about it enough, but to give you some background, it's really important, it's used really widely, it affects us really directly. And the way that the CPI started, at least in the US, was because Republicans and Democrats were fighting over who was right about a tariff that they implemented in 1890. They wanted to know how it affected the population, which at the time, the population was considered white guys that lived in the city and that were married. So if you were single, if you were a single mom, if you were not white, if you were not a guy, you were not part of the survey. And for, almost 50 years, that was a measure that they used to create all sorts of legislations that directly affected the entire population of the US. It took 50 years for them to actually start including in the survey Hispanics and Blacks. So, 50 years for that. And they purposefully underrepresented these populations. Then it took another 40 years to 1978 for them to actually rework the survey in a way that addressed some of these biases. Since then, there has not been a major revamp. It's almost like moving mountains to actually change this type of methodology. And I can tell you that I used to work for the government. I was part of not the CPI, the Producer Price Index, and the payroll numbers. And there's so much research that goes into it that never comes out, that never sees the light of day. And that just, nothing happens. It's just very politicized. And it's not often, or it's really rarely acknowledged. And so there are other methodology issues with the CPI that people talk about all the time. Conflict of interest, it's my main point, and the only thing that I think crypto can actually improve upon. And so some examples of this, and you tell me when I have 5 minutes, but it's Argentina. Okay, Argentina from 2007 to 2015, they openly admitted to only reporting a third, basically, of their inflation. Why? Because they needed some loans, and if you have really high inflation, you're not gonna get you're gonna get either a higher interest rate, or you're not gonna get a loan from the IMF or the World Bank. And so they just reported that for a few years, and went ahead and right now the inflation in Argentina is 300%, something crazy like that. Last year, I think around this time, it was in the 109. Um, Not that if they had better measures, they would have made better policies, but definitely better policies cannot come from measures that are purposefully misaligned or misrepresented. Zimbabwe has a similar story, but they basically their government just decided to use old methodology for their new legislation because that just felt better or supported it better. Venezuela, we still don't know what is going on there. So. But anyway, so antitrust laws protect us from monopolies, and we rarely think of governments as monopolies, right? So, but they provide us all of this wealth of data and information that we pay for, by the way, with taxes, because everybody that sits in the Bureau of Labor Statistics, it's paid by our taxes. And we just take it for granted, like it's right. There are some paid companies that try and recreate this, but then that goes back to the same problem. It's like, if it's not transparent, we cannot know whether or not these values are correct. And there's obviously a conflict of interest. And in DeFi, I'm sure the government's gonna go after, a lot of this conflict of interest where like you're DeFi and you're the Oracle, and there can be, they don't like that, but here they're clearly that, they're clearly the problem. And I'm not saying that all governments, don't provide the best data that they can. I think that most of them do, but that can change very quickly depending on the political climate. And so now we have technology, and we have that we can recreate this not as a challenge to the government, I would say, at least not at the beginning, more as a complement, right? It's a complementary piece of data that should move in line with what the government is creating. And so the problem with that is that once it becomes challenging or challenges their data, we have to make sure that we actually use open, decentralized networks behind it. And that's where Tellor comes in. That's one of the reasons that, I'm from Tellor, but it's decentralized. I can't stop Tellor. And so if the government comes after it because it doesn't agree with the values that we're putting out, and obviously the CPI would be a sort of it's a common good, and it would be it's not just Tellor providing the data, and the data would be completely open and transparent, the methodology as well. And then if you don't like my methodology, go ahead and apply a different one. That's fine. And if you want to make money off of it, you can also not share your methodology. But still you need that transparency of the data, underlying data, and the methodology to be able to say, yes, these numbers reflect what you say they should reflect. So obviously we'll be using Tellor. Also, this is a common good. So I cannot afford to go and pay some huge fee to a team to allow me to support this type of data. Tellor is completely open. Anybody can come and request any type of data as long as you have a good specification that reporters feel comfortable to provide the data for. So I would have a really good specification. With the Argentina example, Alberto Cavallo and Mario Bertolotti, they came up with really good methodology to apply and use. It basically used a lot of scraped data, and it came out with the conclusion that on-chain data is highly, highly correlated with off-chain data, and that was before 2020. So at least in the US, that is going to be, I suspect, still true, or even more closely correlated, because we all changed the way that we purchase things to on-chain. It's also censorship resistant, which I need because this is a value that could be highly challenged by the government eventually. Hopefully not, but it could. And then obviously anybody can come and tip, stake, and dispute on Tellor. And because it's the common good, that should be part of the community. It should be owned by the community eventually. So I need some protocol that has those qualities. And then it should be able to provide flexible data, which is what we'll be doing. That is it. So if you have any questions.